Today on TimesCast, anxiety takes hold in Baghdad in the wake of increased violent attacks. A look at how the Republican takeover of the House this week was planned out 2 years ago. And Microsoft's Kinect takes gaming to a new level. A string of attacks in Baghdad in the past week have put the capital under emergency curfew for the first time in years. We have this report from the Times Baghdad Bureau.
The attacks this week in Baghdad against a prominent church and a series of assaults across the capital were some of the worst violence in Baghdad since 2003. They come at a precarious time in the capital and across Iraq. They underline a deep sense of anticipation, a deep sense of anxiety over the direction of the country. But in a broader sense, they illustrate the worry that the institutions of the very state are incapable of coping with what has been a persistent problem in Iraq since 2003. That's violence. The attacks don't come in a vacuum in Baghdad, nor is the violence the same as we've often seen in past weeks and past months. The attack against the church was against one of the most prominent churches in the city, and it underlined a sense of siege among Christians here, many of whom have left since the invasion in 2003. But in conversations across the capital, what's perhaps most striking is the way that people don't cast blame against any one individual or any one politician, but rather the entire class of politicians. There's a growing sense of a gulf between the ruling class and basically those they rule, and there's a sense that that political class isn't able to cope with the problems ahead. They're mired in their own negotiations over power, and while those negotiations go on, the situation in the streets gets worse. There's perhaps something of an irony in all this. At a time that American attention toward Iraq is flagging, the country itself is dealing with some of its most decisive moments. The violence, the deadlock, the loss of faith in the government is making for one of Iraq's biggest crises since 2003.
So Jim, 2 years ago, it looked like the Democrats were unbeatable. And as the president acknowledged yesterday, they took a pretty serious shellacking on Tuesday. And as you acknowledge in your story today, the seeds of the Republican revival were sown really right after the president's election, right?
Yeah, I remember that 2 weekends before inauguration, I remember being in Washington, and it was like the beer coming out of the kegs was blue. I mean, it was party time for the Democrats, and the Republicans were nowhere to be seen. Now we know they were nowhere to be seen because they were up in Annapolis plotting their comeback.
So Jim, in the piece you talk about the strategies the Republicans used to get this new majority, and the first thing that they did was identify potentially vulnerable Democrats, right?
Yeah, again, 2 weekends before the inauguration, they gave a slide presentation. We were lucky enough to get a copy of that slide presentation through sources. And they had 83 seats, vulnerable Democrats, and they're the same Democrats they targeted right through last week.
And those are 83 Democrats who sat in districts that George Bush had once won, right?
Sitting quite uncomfortably in George W. Bush land, yes.
There was also one last thing that you guys talked about, which is this outside money, which you've written so much about, which really did allow them to be a lot more agile in terms of who they could target and how.
Absolutely, and what's funny about that was that we've learned just now that in fact some of these groups that did raise every dollar they said they were going to raise didn't know that it was going to work out that well. And so they were surprised at how well it went. And by the end, and I think this is captured in our story, it was just like a shooting gallery.
So now how does John Boehner sort of go from here?
Well, he can keep being the party of no. President Obama can't be the president of no. So I think there's going to be a lot of philosophical jousting. I wonder how much actual legislation will happen. Obviously, the big thing we're all going to be watching is health care. The Republicans ran on a platform to repeal parts of it, so that will be where the battle lines are drawn, and I think that's where the action will be. But, again, it's early, so we'll see.
On Wednesday in Times Square, consumers lined up to check out Kinect, Microsoft's new gaming product, which went on sale at midnight.
I'm Sam Grobart, personal technology editor for the New York Times, trying out the new Kinect, the latest accessory to Microsoft's popular Xbox video game platform. Kinect is a new product, actually a combination of a camera and some sensors that see your body, allowing you to control on-screen characters with your body's movements. There's no controller required.
If I put my hands up, he puts his hands up. Put my hands up like this, look at his hands. Look at them coins. That's what we're talking about.
It's a new experience for Xbox 360, and everybody's excited because you are the controller.
It's crazy. It's Minority Report status, that's how I see it.
If Kinect is a success, it would probably write a new chapter in video game development, the previous chapter having been written by Nintendo's Wii.
It could bring in a large number of new users and new consumers who never would have thought of themselves as video game players. Now, there is a lot riding on this, and there is one kind of unsure point, which is that this is a Microsoft product. And if there's one thing a lot of people know, is that Microsoft, while being really, really good with software, never been so good with the hardware.
The Xbox is probably their most distinguished product and really the only major success that they can point to. There is a large pile of products somewhere in Redmond, Washington, collecting a lot of dust that got a lot of attention when they first came out, and then nobody ever bought. With the holiday season just approaching, there are going to be a lot of people paying close attention to see if this latest product from Microsoft, something that by the company's own admission they've spent a lot of time and money on, is going to be something that really pays off, or it's just another major Microsoft release that nobody really cares about. For the New York Times, this is Sam Grobart.
Thank you very much.
Join us again tomorrow for TimesCast.